morning, everyone. Thank you. Good morning to you. It is a pleasure to be here with you today to talk about mercy. Real quick, let me read something to you. It's rule number 3 of our orders, or rules for life. In the Order of St. Patrick, it says, each member shall actively participate in the positive development of the local church to which they belong. Our local church is a place to which we go for strength and support to continue our everlasting journey throughout life. Our commitment to the positive development of our local church is a commitment to participate in the life of our local church in such a way it becomes a stronger and more supportive community of faith. We are committed to participating in our local church by sharing freely the gifts God has entrusted to us according to the needs represented in our local church. And as I was preparing for what we plan to discuss today, I thought, what better gift can we as members of this secular cloistered order give to our local churches than to have mercy? And I say these things because there are selective theological paradigms that come from how do we show people God's love and grace and justice, all the things that makes God good, capital G, good, to the world. And there are some faith traditions, there are some paradigms that indicate the ways that we do it is through private piety, reading our Bibles, discussing or consulting commentaries and things like that, praying, inward expressions of the refinement of our spiritual lives. And the other way that we engage in acts of grace, the means of grace, is works of mercy, which includes going out into the world and feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and releasing the prisoners and all those things that many of us talk about in our liturgies and have written down on our walls and our mission statements and things like that. But taking a modern, I really want to say post-pandemic, but we're not there yet. Taking this type of approach, how to engage in works of mercy in the world as it stands today. And when thinking about the opportunity that organizations, institutions, fellowships, the ones in which we are here, and with certain types of community groups and related, I thought about how do we do that in today's age? How do we go out and feed the hungry when we're not able to be more than 6 feet apart from each other? Or less than 6 feet apart from each other? How do we engage with giving students, backpacks full of school supplies and little snacks and stuff when we're not able to take those to them? That everything needs to be sterilized. There's a new normal. So what does the new normal look like in engaging in works of mercy for the church and the people who belong and claim God? And in thinking on that and trying to write a paper for seminary, I'm in seminary, and so a lot of things that I do are more academic. Whether or not that those things are the cutting edge of academia, I don't know. But how do we show God's love and mercy today? And I think it comes from changing our perception of the ways in which we do ministry. That whenever we approach this personal piety type of, I'm going to read the Bible, it's going to illuminate my mind, I'm going to believe this or refine my understanding of this, I become more holy, I become more entrusting into what God would have me to do. That is fine. That is valid. But going out into the world and showing other people, sharing that knowledge in a way, sharing the gifts that God has given us with other people, to me, is equally as important as some faith traditions will say, but it's hardly practiced. And I wanted to make a critique of works of mercy Because far too often we approach helping other people with the idea that we're here to fix them. We approach other people who we see as broken and look at these things, these people, as issues to be solved, problems that require solutions. And as Abbott Scraper talked about yesterday, that there's this wounded type of approach. And I had discussed this with him and a few other people about if we chose to think about the ways in which we engage with mercy, in mercy with the world, instead of looking at people and groups and systems as things that are broken and require fixing, and if we instead look at people and things as people who fundamentally lack some sort of indescribable thing that has prevented them from becoming the most complete versions of themselves. If we instead look at people who are lacking something, to understand something, if we change our approach from fixing something to realizing something lacks or something has not been, a piece that is missing but is yet there. I wonder how our approaches to homelessness, our approaches to hunger, our approaches to people who live lives in which they are unhappy, how that would change if we embolden ourselves to look at our hermeneutics, to look at our pedagogy, which is our way of teaching, in one that is more focused on mercy, of pouring out of ourselves into other people rather than piety, of being inward and looking inside of ourselves. If we cared more about other people and actually cared about them rather than to address these things, how much more of a robust faith we all would have. When considering the shifts these days in providing basic social services to the world and our communities, there are already other institutions and organizations who do what the church used to do. Our faith communities, our churches used to be the bastion of social services, and in the past few generations, that's no longer possible. So if we keep ourselves to what we know, which is working through God, working through our faith, and being in community of one another, of people who are radically different from one another, who are working together for change, how do we keep that foothold? How do we remind ourselves why we're here, but allow space for these other organizations to kind of do what they need to do, to remind the church that we need to do what we need to be doing, which is engaging in works of mercy.
I'm going to switch with you.
Okay.
Your mic's cutting in and out a little bit.
All right. You want me to go ahead and turn this one off? Where was I? Oh, yes. So it's interesting then, as we approach this new normal, that we see that folks who took for granted a lot of the societal or theological paradigms that kept them comfortable. We see in our churches today, I've seen in my church, that people who held prominent positions or people who had very well-paying jobs are not allowed to go to work because of, right now in 2020, the pandemic. And how do we adjust to attending to the needs of people who have not had their, or did not need their needs to be attended to start with? How do we go and engage with people in the world through acts of mercy for folks who have never needed or never felt the need to be taken care of in such a way? How do we change the perception of this whole, oh my gosh, I have to go to church because I don't have money for, I don't know, electricity, or I can't pay my bill, so, oh my gosh, I got fired from my job or laid off. Now I have to go to the church and I have to plea and beg so they can give me $40 to pay my water. And I think the perception is that that is an awful thing to do. It means that you have failed in some way in today's contemporary culture to go and ask for help, to allow the church to engage in acts of mercy where it's really no skin off of our backs. It's really no possibility for us to go without to help people out who have never felt the need to be helped out. This requires us to really take a step back and look at the church, to look at the ways in which we are engaging with our communities as people, as leaders and followers and believers or whatever of faith, and really in general, who we are as people today. When we think about acts or works of mercy, in the United Methodist tradition, there are several ways to do it. Doing good, which is kind of nebulous, visiting the sick and prisoners, feeding and clothing people, earning and saving and giving all that we can, and opposition to oppression. And the reason why this acts of mercy, this works of mercy, this pedagogy of mercy was so important to me is because I happened to take a class on emancipatory pedagogy. And so that's a big word for saying teaching freedom. How do we liberate ourselves and others around us in a way in which we can live a more robust life? And to take that concept and make it theological, to really draw it out. How does God or the Holy Spirit or Jesus, how are we liberated? How are we given that true freedom from sin and death and selfishness and pride and all those things that tell us that we don't need mercy? That mercy is for those people. That giving away, food at the soup kitchen is for those people and not for me. But I think 2020, I pray that this year comes quickly to an end, that it's not about mercy is for those people, because the people who say it's for those people are now those people too. And so if we take this approach of everyone deserves mercy, everyone deserves to be clothed and to be fed and to be comforted when people die or when people are in jail or people are sick. Like, how do we teach the people in our churches? This is the way that we can do things. This is a new opportunity to discover how we engage with one another in such a way that love and mercy and justice and grace and peace is delivered to the people who are within our churches, within our communities. How do we share those with one another and then go out into the world? And it's easier to do that now that some churches have not come back to in-person worship. It's easier to do that when the perception is that we can do things outside of the four walls. It was something that was suggested the past decade, but it's a reality now that we can indeed do God's work outside of the building. And thank God for that. But one of my approaches to pedagogy, since I've called myself a Christian educator, which I think is as big of a joke as I make it, because we're all Christian educators, right? We're all still learning. But once I've decided to tell myself that, how do I serve my local church in a way where I can share the ideals and share the theological paradigms and allow people the resources to give them permission, as if I have to give people permission, to think about things in a different way? See, the Pedagogy of Mercy says that we're going to step into life together. Into life together. And say that if you have a need, if you've identified something that you lack in your life, instead of us dispensing the resources, instead of just giving you a book and expecting you to read it, how do we walk with you in this journey to where you and I can both grow from these experiences? I've been doing campus ministry for 10 years, and that's not necessarily true. I've been a part of campus ministry for 10 years, and one of the parts that I certainly love about interacting with traditionally aged college students who are young adults most of the time is that they have so many questions about how to do this, how to do that. What does this mean theologically? And it's so incredibly hard not to give these folks an answer, to just dispense, well, this is what I believe. This is what the doctrine is. This is what the orthodox answer is. A pedagogy of mercy allows us to sit there with them and say, well, what do you believe? How are you informed by the Spirit about this, that, or the other? How does God talk to you and speak to you? What do you see? What do you experience? How are you thinking about? What's going on up here? Mercy means that we allow people the freedom to choose how God relates to them. Because through campus ministry, no, we don't have hundreds upon thousands of new United Methodists coming out, but I will tell you that we have people who are more complete people because they have the ability to stand in their own thinking and understanding. That we have provided a space for young folks to really challenge what they believe and be challenged by it and to gain a better understanding. And that's liberation. Because freedom, I don't think, from sin and death, I think that those things look completely different depending on who you are. It could be freedom from being so proud. It could be freedom from feeling so ashamed. It could be freedom from accepting the love and grace and mercy that God has provided for us. The pedagogy of mercy is liberating. But within some of our faith traditions, we have to choose to accept that freedom. We have to choose to say yes or no. We have to make the space to allow God to work within us. And this may sound a lot like piety, but I think works of mercy deserves a reexamination. That no longer can we, as people who live within a church system, go out and provide just one meal to someone who comes up to the church every week. You give them $20 for gas, you give them $20 for groceries, and send them on their way. A pedagogy of mercy means that we sit down with them and actually do the work of wondering why they need that money to start with. What are the resources available in the neighborhood? What does the job market look like? Who are our neighbors in the places in which we are assigned to or work in or live out with togetherness in? We need to examine how people are treated and why why are they asking for help? Which is a really strange way to say it. Because there's that quote about, we keep on pulling people out of the river, but we don't ask why they're falling in to start with. When I was doing a sermon over the Good Samaritan, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King talked about, we were talking about the road to Jericho and why it's so broken and why it's such a weird and horrible place to travel. But no one talks about why isn't the road safe to start with. We're not fixing the road, we're pulling people out of ditches. The pedagogy of mercy says that we need to go in and be the church. If there's anything another institution can't do that the church can do, is go into where people are at their most vulnerable and ask why, and to be advocates for those people instead of saying, well, here's your $20, we'll see you next week. No, sit here with us and we'll figure out why. We want to help people be more complete people. And we could talk psychologically from Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We can do the Psych 101 thing. But how do we engage with God's people, God's children, creation, and say we as the church, as the institution dedicated bringing God's realm to earth, and be good stewards of our gifts and our talents, our graces, our faith, and our witness? How do we help one another achieve or understand or realize that they are free to choose the value God has given them? And I'll be honest with you, I don't have everything figured out. If so, I would have written a book about it, and it would have been over there available to you here at the retreat and for those watching. But it's something most certainly to think about. If we're really going to be the church, if we're really going to act in a way where we clothe the naked and we free people from sin, we got to realize that God does most of that. And we got to realize, as people who dedicate themselves to living into intentional with one another, growing in our faith, there needs to be a desire to share that with other people. Because I'm studying, I'm looking, and I am somewhat cautiously optimistic to what the fate of the church will look like after this pandemic. I'm cautiously optimistic to see how God will work through online churches, brick and mortar churches, fellowships, communities, things springing up, people coming together yet socially distanced on the internet into this new paradigm. And I think revisiting the works of mercy that the Catholic Church, some Lutheran traditions, the United Methodist Church, how do we engage with people in a time where it's hard to engage with people? And I don't think that we can do it alone. I think it requires people to come together and be committed to sharing God's love and mercy in the places where that is no longer there, let alone the places where it used to be, and we've taken that for granted, and it's gone. Because the world today, especially as we're live streaming this and talking about this, especially, how do we live in a world so divided on not just political lines, but theological lines, societal, economic? I mean, there's so much division. But we say that Christ is the great equalizer, that Christ brings everyone together regardless. But a part of that is to acknowledge that we are indeed different people, that we come from different backgrounds, and we should celebrate those things. And not only should we celebrate those things, that we will able to utilize one another's gifts to bring that sense of community, that sense of security, that sense of fellowship, that sense of love to people who don't have it anymore. That's the pedagogy of mercy. But I am cautiously optimistic. I often wonder, personally, that if it wasn't for people who were dedicated to what Christ is doing in the world, if there wasn't people who were dedicated to that, I honestly would not be up on the stage talking to you and rambling on in this morning's session. Because people chose to go against what is reasonable, to go out on a limb for me, to exercise radical mercy and grace for me, so that I won't have to choose selfish things to survive. Because folks in the United Methodist tradition and the Southern Baptist tradition chose to live faithfully into an attitude of mercy for one of the townie kids in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, just one of the street rats running around, and chose to give love and grace and mercy and peace to me, I'm able to be here today. And it's so radical because there are many folks who still continue to live in a way where they don't know or understand or are not able to see what true mercy and love and grace look like. And I think one vital opportunity we have in this new normal is to be able to share our stories in a way, to share our knowledge in a way where it's not going to be very uncomfortable to do it. Our online presences, I believe, is going to become more natural. That there are some jokes about how churches are now just big televangelism events, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. Because people are so connected now, more than before. And if we can show them as members of our local churches, as we engage in giving mercy to our churches, how do we go out and connect with people who we haven't connected with before? In the old generation, you were knocking on doors, hey, come to church. You were leaving flyers and things, and you were walking around the neighborhood. Can't do that anymore. So how do we apply ourselves to being evangelistic and showing them that the ways in which we engage in mercy is that we are benefited just as much as the people we take care of? Because we can see the humanity in one another. That we help with programs, that we provide resources, that we ourselves become a resource for people in the future. Mercy requires us to live outside of ourselves and to truly walk beside or in the shoes of people that we interact with, to see where they're coming from, to challenge ourselves to allow God to see the world in which they see it. In the New Testament, Paul, the Apostle Paul, likes to talk quite a bit about looking into the looking glass, looking into the mirror, and seeing the image of God in himself and in other people. And I think the pedagogy of mercy, simply put, is challenging ourselves to see the likeness of God in every single person that we meet and be compelled, if not encouraged, if not challenged, to have our hearts break, to just think about how can we help? How can we walk together? How can we both grow into community with one another through these things? I think that's going to be the new normal. I think even though we're socially distanced and some churches may never reopen and some new expressions of theology will come out, whatever that means, that human connection, that very human yet very divine connection, of being one with another in these vulnerable times is really going to save the church. To remember our humanness, to remember our authenticity. But at the end of the day, know that God's divinity means that we do have freedom to choose at some point mercy over judgment, piety over selfishness, peace over chaos, and love over apathy. And it's my prayer for each and every one of you as we go out into the world that blessed are the peacemakers, for they are the children of God. I thank you guys so much for allowing me to get up here and ramble for 30 minutes. It's most appreciated. So yeah, thank you.